Freedom and consciousness actually have always been interconnected and interrelated and interdependent towards one another in one way or another, and that means they're always connected intricately and inseparably. So much so that without the one, the other cannot and does not and will not exist. And that means if we do not have freedom, we cannot aspire for consciousness. And if we do not have consciousness within and about ourselves in our mind, behavior, action, ideology, profession, belief, then obviously we will not achieve, experience, actualize any type of freedom in our lives, no matter what we think, say, achieve, possess, become in our lives, but that will always be at the expense of the others, that will always be obviously exploited and manipulated because we do not have freedom within and about ourselves. And that means the more consciousness we conquer in our lives, the more we develop, grow, cultivate basically consciousness within and about ourselves, the more freedom we will be able to develop. And if we don't have any consciousness, awareness within and about ourselves at all, then we do not have certainly any type of freedom under any circumstance and situations, no matter what the modern society, system, institutions provide us with or tell us about having freedom, liberty, equality, justice all the time in everything. But ultimately we're being exploited, manipulated, diverted, distracted from our purposes, intentions, originalities, authenticities, and actions, and from everything else that we really thought and that we also wanted to do has somehow been diverted from our attention with the basically help of this slave mentality, with the culture and society that obviously prioritizes entertainment, pleasure, want, addiction, attention, approval, validation all the time upon both digital places, social media, Facebook, Instagram, as well as in external reality, in real life conditions, actual circumstances, societal premises. We all now have become addicted to the acquisition and possession of basically not only achievement, success, money, fame, but also attention, approval, validation all the time, that again has deteriorated our own significance, degraded our values, qualities, virtues, and obviously downgraded our whole personality, authenticity, purpose, intention, desire, etc. And all we have now become is tools of the one another, because ultimately we have become the one another's bitter rivals, enemies, competitors for either success, validation, approval, money, fame, or for the other possessions and objective pleasures and materialistic values in our lives. So obviously this constant exposure to society public premises has not only led to the deterioration of our whole psychology, authenticity, originality, character, value, virtue, distinction, sovereignty, but it has also diverted us, destroyed us from our original purposes, intentions, aims, and realities in our lives, because the modern system and society ultimately wanted to turn us against the one another. And this system also only promotes competition, rivalry in everything. Under all circumstances and situations, everything has to be a competition. Everything has to be recorded in real time. Everything has to be posted online on social media, whether or not it makes sense. Even if it's absolutely absurd, then also it's basically validated, rationalized, logicalized by the masses, by the majority that obviously believe in and persist in and adhere to mediocrity, ignorance, arrogance, conformity, stupidity all the time in their behavior, action, ideology, belief, faith, etc. And they have been systematically brainwashed and developed into these basically conformist peoples that exhibit all these dangerous qualities by the modern system itself. Because of the training of the modern system of education, society, we have become what we have become at the end of the day. And that is really heartbreaking and disheartening for all of us, that we do not have any more solitude, freedom, individuality, distinction, authenticity in our lives. But that has happened because of more than necessary or fundamental exposure to societal circumstances, external premises, and outside conditions for attention, validation, approval, money, fame, and also because we have made ourselves exploitable, manipulative entities at the hands of the one another. So the more we expose ourselves, not only do we downgrade in ourselves, and not only does our distinction fades over time, but we also convince the others of our own exploitability and manipulability at the hands of the others. We literally make the others believe that they can obviously use us in whichever ways they want. So the more we expose ourselves, the more we make ourselves available to be exploited, manipulated, corrupted, dominated, enslaved, not just at the hands of the other people in our societies that may be richer, more influential, wealthier, powerful than us, but obviously at the hands of the modern organizations, institutions, offices, ultimately where slaves were enslaved, subjugated in everything, and there is no scope for critical thinking, individuality, distinction, sovereignty anymore in human behavior, life, action, ideology, education, purpose, success, because anything that does not match the narrative, anything that defies, disappoints, and goes against the accepted norms, conventional knowledge, and traditional wisdom, that thing is not just ruthlessly targeted, but also relentlessly and unnecessarily attacked, bombarded, criticized, condemned, violated over and over and over again through basically social media platforms, online abuses, and also by the masses because they have been turned into basically weapons and tools for inflicting harm and abuse on the man and women of freedom, individuality, consciousness, and sovereignty by the ignorant, arrogant, conformist, stupid masses in one way or another. And that is a significant problem that we're up against in the modern society. But then again, the more consciousness we achieve, we develop, we cultivate, we grow about ourselves in our actions, behaviors, ideologies, beliefs, certainly the more freedom we're not just going to be able to develop, but also we're going to be able to experience and actualize in our lives, in our behaviors, actions, successes. There is going to be an individual self-made freedom that comes not just from our being in solitude, but also from our consciousness. And the more we rise on the ladder of consciousness, the more we refine our consciousness, the more powerful, developed, advanced, refined our consciousness, sovereignty, mindset, intellect becomes because of hard work, because of decades of persistence, perseverance, resilience, desire, ambition, pains. Certainly, the more advanced our freedom will look like, the more powerful our freedom is going to become, and the more freedom, certainly, we're going to be able to develop, experience, and realize in our lives because of our heightened, powerful, developed, and matured consciousness that obviously not everyone in our surroundings have, because consciousness in itself can be a blessing, a miracle, and also a burden, a problem at the same time. Only few people in the world have developed consciousness or advanced, powerful, refined consciousness, awareness that enables them to see, feel, and explain almost everything that happens before them or that is not even happening just with the help of a glance. They don't have to do anything, just they have to be there in the circumstance and the situation, and they are instantly able to understand everything. And that's the power of consciousness and advanced consciousness, as I just mentioned earlier. So obviously it's all connected with the development of consciousness. The more consciousness we developed as a result of suffering, experiencing struggle, suffering, pain, betrayal, corruption, heartbreak in our lives, certainly the more conscious and aware we're going to become, and as a result of that directly, the more freedom we're going to develop and we're going to experience in our lives in almost all aspects, areas, and fields as far as human psychology and action is concerned. So obviously freedom exists not just because of political constructs. Freedom cannot be given to us by anything or anyone besides ourselves, by anyone or anything beyond, remote from our control, desire, ambition. Freedom cannot, does not, and will not come to us because we don't control anyone or anything besides and beyond ourselves, but we can and will only be control ourselves, our actions, behaviors, ideologies, systems. The only thing we control at the end of the day is ourselves, our behaviors, actions, ideologies, mindset. judgment, choice, decision, etc. Or that too is already decided by the universe, or that is also dictated by the other people's reactions, responses, behaviors, perceptions towards ourselves. But then again, we can still bring ourselves into control. We can still control, dominate, discipline ourselves through the exercise of consciousness, discipline, moderation, virtue, responsibility, character, distinction, etc. And the more we're able to keep ourselves in control, certainly the more freedom we're going to experience in everything, and the more control we're going to be in, and not the others over us. So that's how freedom and consciousness works. So freedom and consciousness are connected, associated, involved, and related to each other, and there's nothing we can do about this distinction, connection, and differentiation. Now, whether or not we're going to acknowledge this connection depends upon us, but this is real. If we do not have consciousness, then we do not have freedom, because freedom cannot be and will not be provided to us by political institutions, governments, organizations, industries, institutions that we always trust, respect, admire, support, and vote for at the end of the day. But ultimately, they are exploiting our labor, manipulating our resources, perception of reality, and enslaving us more and more, so that we're always engaged in action, so that we just do not have any time to reflect upon ourselves, to look back upon our lives and be proud of ourselves, so that we do not have any time for investigation, reflection, interrogation of ourselves, of our own mistakes, blunders for societies, about our own shortcomings, deficiencies, and also to be proud of our merits, credits, abilities, talents, virtues, etc. So that's how the modern system is designed to exploit more and more from and of us. Our talent, realization, actualization will be taken away, and we have strategically and systematically been suppressed, repressed, and tormented, exploited in almost everything in life, and we just don't even have ourselves in control, because we're not conscious, we're unconscious, because we have been put to deep sleep by the modern system of comfort, relaxation, peace, addiction, pleasure, entertainment all the time, that desperately tries to tell us and make us believe that everything is all right, when in reality everything is falling apart before our eyes. But still we're ignorant, we're unconscious, because we're not just led by this false ideology and fundamentally fraudulent behavior of the modern system, society, education, entertainment industries that obviously breaks our concentration, focus, attention at every step of the way. But we're also led by our past torments, unresolved chaos, repressed desires, etc., that we just could not acknowledge, integrate, recognize, and we certainly could not prevent them, reform them either. And now they dominate our conscious behavior, action, ideology, success, etc. So in all, at the end of the day, if we have consciousness, despite all of our struggles, problems, drawbacks, negatives in our lives going on, or that we have been through, we will be able to develop and experience freedom and not lose it away. But freedom will not be given to us under any circumstance and situations by the governments, leaders, rulers, officials that are still there in the country and in the world. They just want to take everything away from us, including our truth, potential, wisdom, intelligence, sovereignty, distinction, character, authenticity, dignity, critical thinking, so that we just abandon these qualities. We do not even consider these qualities as part of our lives, as essential, fundamental, critical elements of the human life for a life of meaning, significance, worthwhileness, trustworthiness, dignity, etc., and prioritize addiction, pleasure, comfort, attention, validation all the time as the imperative requirements, as the fundamental necessities for a life that's meaningful, purposeful, worthwhile, sovereign, distinct, when in reality the modern life is tormented. The modern life is more exploited, manipulated, governed, and enslaved by outside forces, superior powers, and external arbitrators than ever before. And that is a fundamental problem, because our consciousness has been killed, and we also have not worked, grinded hard upon ourselves, upon the development of consciousness. And certainly when we develop consciousness, we will be able to realize that freedom does not come from external conquests, societal validation, and outside attention, approval, success, fame, or garments, but it comes from our core. Freedom comes from the deepest recesses of the mind, from realization of one's own abilities, talents, torments, etc., from seeking reform over everything, from integration. That freedom comes from the deepest cores of our psyche, from our soul. And once we realize that, once we develop that kind of consciousness and awareness, not only are we going to become free from all these vain fancies, desires, wants of ourselves and from the others in our lives, but we're certainly going to become almost invincible, unstoppable, unflinching, indisputable in our lives, and in almost everything that we attempt, do, think, say in our lives will be felt across the room because of our liberation, because of our freedom that we have developed, that we have achieved because of our consciousness, on the basis of our consciousness and awareness, and not because of external constructs, outside governments and societal institutions of attention, validation, pleasure, entertainment all the time that are bad anyways. So that's how freedom becomes a reality. That's how freedom becomes possible. So the higher we climb the ladder of consciousness, the higher freedom, the more freedom, the better freedom we're able to develop, and we're going to be able to experience in our lives, that will provide us with unparalleled clarity and terrifying truth regarding the other's absurdity, stupidity, ignorance, arrogance, and bad behaviors, and expose the system, and also we'll be able to understand ourselves in ever seen before light, and that will be our greatest triumph. So freedom comes primarily from within ourselves, and all other qualities also are dependent upon the self and the self only, such as happiness, meaning, virtue, distinction, dignity. All those qualities also come from within ourselves, from our own internal conquests, from basically understanding, removing our own mental barriers and all of the obstacles, hindrances, limitations that we impose or that we've imposed upon ourselves for societal expectations, desires, demands, for outside governmental interferences, threats, repressions. So that's how freedom becomes possible once we achieve conquest over ourselves, and once we also continue to conquer, overcome, basically triumph over our own barriers, meanings, ambitions, aspirations, goals, intentions, purposes over and over and over again. And then we find the ultimate connection between our souls and the universe. And in that moment, not only do we become freedom, we achieve consciousness, and we become absolutely invincible, insurmountable, no matter the external difficulty, threat, danger that lies. So that's how freedom and consciousness works in harmony, in sync, in unity all the time. Without the one, the other cannot, does not, and will not become possible for us. If we have consciousness, we have freedom. If we have freedom, then we have also consciousness within ourselves. So that's how this thing works.